Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating. Elaine Showalter's incredibly insightful review of Joyce Carol Oates' massive 24th novel, Blonde. Now, if you think you already know the story of Marilyn Monroe, well, get ready to have your perspective totally flipped. We're going to look at exactly how Oates takes a global, almost untouchable icon and completely reshapes her through the powerful lenses of myth, art, and some seriously brilliant structural storytelling.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a fantastic little anecdote that Showalter shares at the very beginning of her review. She recalls this conversation she once had with Joyce Carol Oates about a poem Oates had written. The poem was describing a deer in her garden. When Showalter asked her about the specifics of it, Oates gave this brilliant, wry response. She said, "Actually, there were 5 deer, but art must simplify." Now, I really want you to keep that quote in mind because it is the absolute core thesis of everything we're about to explore today. That necessity of artistic simplification, that's exactly how a master writer tackles a subject as overwhelmingly complex as Marilyn Monroe.
So, connecting that art must simplify idea to the actual physical book presents a really fascinating paradox. Because Blonde is, well, it's a brick. It's a daunting, operatic novel clocking in at 738 pages. But Oates undertook this massive task to explore Marilyn's life not just as some piece of cheap celebrity gossip, but as a profound American tragedy, and specifically a female tragedy. She takes the chaotic, sprawling reality of one of the 20th century's biggest icons, and she uses those 738 pages to forge a singular, fiercely focused narrative. Section 1. A Feminist Perspective. Now, what's really interesting here is how Oates boldly flips traditional expectations completely upside down. For decades, the myth of Marilyn Monroe has been almost entirely owned and shaped by men. Think about Norman Mailer writing about her as this tragic goddess, or Elton John singing about her legend in Candle in the Wind. These are the classic male mythologizers. But Showalter points out that Oates' version is a total game changer because she actually reclaims the narrative. She tackles the life and the legend not through that male gaze that completely defined Marilyn's career, but through a profound feminist lens, one that actually understands the unique, crushing cultural pressures placed upon her simply because she was a woman. Section 2. Distilling an Epic. So, how exactly does an author capture an entire era? Showalter explains that Oates weaves together this sweeping tapestry of sports, religion, literature, theater, and politics, resulting in what she calls a Balzacian novel, referring, of course, to the great French novelist who tried to depict the absolute entirety of society. And to truly understand the sheer, overwhelming scope of this book, just listen to this cast of characters for a second. Daryl Zanuck, Van Johnson, Richard Widmark, Marlon Brando, John Huston, Joe DiMaggio, Billy Wilder, Tony Curtis, Arthur Miller, Clark Gable, Montgomery Clift, and JFK. I mean, wow, it's a staggering, rapid-fire list of real-world titans. Seamlessly weaving these massive historical figures into the protagonist's orbit proves the fearless ambition of this book. It's not just Marilyn's story anymore. It's literally the story of the American 20th century. But despite that massive cast, we have to remember our opening quote about the deer, right? Oates aggressively condenses Monroe's vast, messy reality. The real Norma Jean lived in countless foster homes. She had numerous lovers, multiple medical crises, suicide attempts. But Oates applies that radical simplification of art. She places this vast story into a tight aesthetic context by exploring just one fictitious foster home and a select, highly symbolic few lovers and crises. By reducing the noise, she actually amplifies the emotional truth.
Section 3. A Shakespearean Tragedy.
Listen, this level of distillation requires a very specific metaphorical blueprint. Otherwise, the whole thing just collapses under its own weight. And the structural scaffolding of Blonde is incredibly deliberate. The novel is divided into 5 acts, structurally designed to perfectly mirror the pacing and the inevitable creeping doom of a Shakespearean tragedy. She even goes as far as dedicating these acts to the Shakespearean critic Michael Goldman and the Hollywood producer Eleanor Bergstein. This 5-act foundation is exactly what holds this massive story together, giving it the grand, tragic momentum of a play like Hamlet or King Lear. And, building right on top of that theatrical framework, Oates frames the narrative with epigraphs on acting from Konstantin Stanislavski. It's a brilliant choice. It allows Oates to deeply, philosophically question what it actually means to be an actress. Think about it. What does it mean to exist inside the relentless, crushing machinery of Hollywood and the studio system, constantly performing a version of yourself that the world violently demands to see?
So the really crucial point here is how the studio actually answered that question. Spoiler alert, they didn't see her as an artist at all. They saw her as a product. Oates defines the creation of the platinum blonde Marilyn as a form of animal manufacture, which is just a chilling phrase. It was a construction process akin to breeding livestock. This harsh critique highlights the devastating, truly heartbreaking difference between the manufactured, glossy Hollywood star the public devoured and the deeply vulnerable, abused child Norma Jean Baker who was trapped inside that image. To cope with all of this, the real woman inside the icon created fictions of her own, a sort of private mythology. As an abandoned child, she invented this elaborate foundling fantasy to escape her trauma. She imagined that her great-grandmother was Mary Baker Eddy, her godmother was the actress Norma Shearer, and her father was the silent film star Rudolph Valentino. It was a private coping mechanism, a fake family romance. But tragically, as Oates points out, even her private escape mechanism eventually took on the exact same falsity as a Hollywood film script.
Section 4. The Doomed Princess.
Stepping beyond Shakespeare for a moment, Oates also reads Marilyn's life as a dark, epic fairy tale, rather than just a standard Hollywood biography. And every fairy tale needs its archetypes. So we have the fair princess. Oates writes that the fair princess demands extreme youth and extraordinary physical beauty, which inevitably makes her vulnerable to the homicidal envy of others. Then we have the dark prince, embodied beautifully in the novel by the young Marlon Brando. What's incredible here is Oates's lyric sensuality. Scholter praises how Oates describes male beauty with equal reverence, noting Brando's beautifully sculpted chest and perfectly shaped features. Yet, just like the princess, the dark prince also pays a terribly heavy price for his fame. Ultimately, though, the fair princess turns into the doomed maiden. Showalter notes that Oates paints Monroe as the ultimate victim at what she calls a massive, murderous conspiracy to exploit and destroy female innocence. This is a devastating male conspiracy that enthusiastically consumes and exploits Marilyn's lush sexuality while simultaneously acting totally disgusted by it, treating it as something soiled or rancid. It's a deeply tragic, completely unwinnable situation for the heroine of our fairy tale. Section 5. A Mighty Theme. As we pull all these incredible threads together, the feminist perspective, the Shakespearean structure, and the dark fairy tale elements, Scholter concludes that Oates is really tapping into the great Melvillian American tradition. The idea is pretty simple, but it is profound. A mighty book requires a mighty theme. Oates takes the chaotic, sprawling, deeply sad tragedy of Marilyn Monroe and simplifies it into a tightly woven, mesmerizing masterpiece. Just like condensing 5 Deer in a Garden down to one singular perfect image, she captures the whole by focusing the lens. And why does this matter to us? Because it shows how high art can actually rescue a real human life from the cheapness of tabloid mythology. Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought to reflect on as we wrap up this explainer. Looking at the Shakespearean tragedy and the incredibly dark fairy tale of Norma Jean Baker, we really have to ask, can true innocence ever actually survive the Hollywood dream machine? Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this deep dive into Joyce Carol Oates' artistic distillation has left you with a lot to think about, and maybe even inspired you to look at the pop culture myths we consume every day in a completely new light. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.